What you said, Pastor, would you
Like I said, shut up and sit down. More or less. Yeah. There was a president. In order to prevent him becoming too powerful, the first presidents were elected only for 1 year and could succeed themselves only once. 2 years was the limit they could serve. And really, the president of this early fellowship was hardly more than the presiding officer at the conference. It wasn't a full-time position or even a part-time one. The first full-time president was elected in 1925, but even then, the presidents had to be elected yearly. There was issues about a delegate system that would come up occasionally. And the president in 1921 said that it served no good purpose other than to deny any longer that the Lutheran Free Church was a church body. Thus, there was a need for congregations to be represented by delegates. The old first full-time president, Endre Gienold, opposed it. He said it would turn us into a synod, and it was rejected by the conference. There was what was called an organization committee, which eventually would become the Board of Administration, and in the AFLC known as the Coordinating Committee. It was incorporated later. It wasn't incorporated really until 1923. The responsibilities were vague at first. They felt they should be organizing the Lutheran Free Church to carry on church work, but they didn't know how to do it. And they didn't want to compete with the corporations such as missions and schools. Eventually, they said that their main task was to promote the knowledge and discussion of the fundamental principles, to counsel pastors and congregations, and in general, to function between conferences. There was distrust of a strong president, and so the sense was having this committee as kind of a balance to the president conducting the business between the conferences. Also, their most thankless task was to assemble statistics. Yeah. They tried in 1902 to find out how many congregations they had. A third responded. So,
How do they know that?
they guessed. A third of the ones to whom they sent letters responded. Let's try it that way. In 1907, they came up with their first somewhat reliable report. It was really quite amazing. 105 pastors, 283 congregations, and 81 of what they called preaching places. That was like, I suppose, home mission starts. 81 preaching places, 283 congregations. Augsburg was always seen, in these early years in particular, as the heart of the church. In 1902, Professor Oftedal resigned. He said he was too old to continue. He was in his late 50s. He finally agreed to fill in on a limited basis, died in 1911. The New Testament instructor was a pastor who had served, by the way, at McIntosh, Minnesota, where we have congregations now. His name was Andreas Helland, and he would be the great assembler of Sverdrup's writings and the first biographer of Sverdrup. And he was one who would keep the Lutheran Free Church in the old paths. And to his last days, I guess, would still get up at the annual conferences if there was any shade of something synodical in a resolution. Helen would get up and sound the warning. In 1907, Professor Sverdrup died. And I have two pictures of the student body the year before he died and the student body and faculty afterwards. And it's just like, you can almost see the difference in the pictures, that it was like there was a cloud resting over the group when the second picture was taken. There was a passing of the old generation. And a few years later, Sverdrup's son, George, it's the same name, only Americanized, George Sverdrup took over for his father. He was only 33 or 32 years old. He was a non-theologically trained layman. He was an archaeologist, very much of a scholar. He had been involved in various expeditions in the Middle East and the Holy Land, and was living over there, in fact, teaching when his father died. He was brought back to continue in the tradition of his father, and it is said for him that the old slogans were more than slogans. They were really his heart convictions. He had a deep dislike for authoritarianism of any kind. No desire to exercise coercive authority. He preferred to rely, says one writer, on rational persuasion. Deeply committed to his father's ideals and goals, he firmly believed that the Lutheran Free Church had a distinctive mission, and accordingly was skeptical of anything that sounded like a suggestion of a merger movement. The Lutheran Free Church developed a healthy world mission and home mission program. The number of the congregations is somewhat deceiving, I suppose, in a way, because we see that many of these early mission starts didn't make it, or only lasted for a few years and then gave up. But they were going into areas where the Scandinavian people were gathering and seeking to plant churches. And some of those people moved on, and then the congregation died. Some places they built buildings, other places it was only a cemetery. O.M. Norley, in his 2-volume set on the Norwegian Lutheran churches in America, has a pretty good record of all these different congregations in various places. And it is fun to look over that book. It's all in Norwegian, and to see some of these places, towns that don't even exist anymore, where there was a church for a while. And he was trying to draw information, records about it. Some have laughed over the years too. In this book, he'll list the membership, so many souls, and then he'll say how many of them were non-Norwegian. And it almost sounds like the non-Norwegians, it was a question whether they had souls. No, not really. But he will put as ikke norsk, so many non-Norwegian, or else he'll put so many Swedes, or so many German, Tysker, so many Germans were there. One of the congregations, it looked like none of them were Norwegian, which was very unusual, none of the people there. But they distinguish that in the records as they go through with some of these congregations. And it's a set of books that I consult often when I'm invited to church anniversaries to find out something about their background, if that is the heritage from which they came. The fundamental principles themselves and the rules for work that followed provided just a skeleton, a series of people will ask me when I go for informational meetings, give us a copy of the AFLC Constitution. And I point them to the fundamental principles and rules for work, and they look and they said, that's just like 3 pages. They said, where's the Constitution? I said, this is it. This is the series of rules under which we seek to operate. And some people are appalled, and some people are greatly encouraged by that. Some of the comments that I receive in these meetings are very instructive. In one church, there was a man who spoke up and he said, "This can't work. This can't work. It's impossible." And the pastor there spoke up and he said, "Well, I kind of agree with you," but he says, "Apparently it does." Apparently it does. A pastor of another conservative Lutheran church body said to me, after one of these sessions, he said, "I really admire your idealism." But he said, "There has to be a need for more structure here. There has to be a need for some authority over the local congregation, or you just don't know what they're going to do." And I said to him, "Now in your congregation, in your denomination, you have a great deal of authority over the local congregation, it seems to me." "Oh, yes, yes. How is that working?" And his response was, "It's not working at all. It's not working well at all." Yeah. And I said, "Well, maybe there's a place for some idealism then, providing it's grounded in the New Testament. Some idealism in the way that we look at the local congregation and congregation's relationship to one another." The Lutheran Free Church was essentially a spiritual movement. I think that is quite clear in what I've mentioned already about people being welcome to come to the conferences and non-members granted voting rights even. If they signed a statement saying we are supportive of the vision and the goals of this movement. I think it's also supported in the fact that they had such a hard time gathering statistics. I used to say back in the 80s when I taught here in the schools that I hoped the day would never come when we get 100% response to our statistical gathering. Now, I should never have said that. And one of our pastors, Lyndon Coronen, says, "I think it's just really funny and ironic that you end up being the one now who has to encourage the churches to turn in these statistical reports every year." Yeah. Ironic, yeah, painful that I have to eat my words. But there always has been a certain sense of, really, is that any of your business on the part of some of the local congregations? An independent spirit that has been there from the beginning and that still lives in some of them. And I guess on the bottom line, I'll say we're going to keep trying to get the reports in. Charlotte will keep calling you and laying much shame on you if you don't cooperate. And yet at the same time, when it comes in, 99% of them, there's a certain corner of my heart that's going to say, "Yay! Yay!" Because there's still a little spark of this orneriness that was there at the beginning. Take that for what it's worth. That's a throwaway one here. As we look over the history of the Lutheran Free Church, we see a growing and developing church body. I mentioned the healthy world mission outreach, the early mission support in Madagascar, mission work also in China, in Japan that developed, real concern for those works, and continuing on supporting inter-Lutheran missions such as the Santal Mission and other independent movements like the Latin American Lutheran Mission found an open door into the congregations as well. It's been interesting in just the last couple of years to have a contact from one of the retired missionaries from Madagascar, and asking me, is there still a heart in the AFLC for Madagascar? What do you mean? Well, there is awakening taking place there, and the churches are reaching out, some of the tribal areas, large numbers of people being converted to Christ. Independently, there's been a great deal of money raised here in the States to reopen what was the Lutheran Free Church Bible School in Madagascar. And the national church over there is saying, we need missionaries. I don't like to mention something like this in a negative way, but I'll do it anyway. They contacted the ELCA offices and said, can you send us some missionaries? And the response that they got was, we don't really have any missionaries like you're looking for anymore. They're looking for evangelists, church planters, to come over there and to work among these tribal peoples. And they have met now, someone has met with our World Mission Committee, and it would be very interesting again to see the Lord opening a door for someone to go to Madagascar because of our long historical contact with that work over there. There was a delightful article, by the way, that I picked up on the internet. I think it came out of Phoenix, Arizona, and one of the Malagasy pastors was here in the United States, and the headline of the article was something like this: Malagasy Lutherans still believe in the devil. Yeah. Which kind of suggested that other Lutherans don't. I'm not sure. But they said that this pastor from over there was talking about their experiences with demon possession and so on there in Madagascar on the mission field. And they said that they feel like as they break into these new areas and deal with converted witch doctors and so on, that there's real demonic activity. And they're very much aware of it and working with it there. And this was almost, in the article, was like an oddity, you know, that there would be somebody who would still believe that such a thing was going on any place in the world today. There were invitations early on for the Lutheran Free Church to become a part of the United Lutheran Church first, and that was discarded in the wastebasket very quickly. Yeah, there was no interest in that whatsoever. A major merger took place among Norwegian Lutherans in 1917. And at that time, the United Church, the Hauge Synod, and the Norwegian Synod merged together in what would be called the Norwegian Lutheran Church of America, eventually called the Evangelical Lutheran Church, the ELC. That was 1917. There was one minor withdrawal from that merger movement, and a new church body was formed. A portion of the Norwegian Synod reorganized as the Evangelical Lutheran Synod, which is headquartered in Mankato, Minnesota, Bethany College there. Some of you are familiar with that. Recipient of great amounts of Schwann Foundation money in their work, which is interesting too. The Bethany College has gone from being a junior college to a four-year college, and just an impressive campus down there, and much of that again funded by gifts from the Schwann Foundation. Yes?
Do you have a sense of how many Hauge Synod congregations did not go into the merger? I know Green Lake Lutheran and Wilmer was one.
Yes, yes. I don't know the number. There were a number of Hauge congregations that became a part of the Lutheran Free Church at that time. Green Lake was one. Fergus Falls was another. Zion and Fergus Falls. Sharon and Grand Forks. They were some that come to my mind that were Hauge Synod churches that withdrew at that time. And there were others as well. There was no attempt, and some became independent. There was no attempt to organize a new church body, however, it seems. that they found a home with the Lutheran Free Church. I think some found a home with the Lutheran Brethren at that time. I believe that would be correct also. Or stayed independent and were served by pastors from those church bodies. Yeah, it would be interesting to know just what the exact number would be. But it was not considered to be a significant withdrawal, and it did not result in a new church body. The ELS continues on today as a smaller Lutheran fellowship and is in fellowship with the Wisconsin Synod. And that's where they found their home after many years of working together with Missouri Synod. They have been informally known over the years as the Little Norwegian Synod. And one of my Concordia St. Louis professors, Robert Kolb, said that he had never met anybody from the ELS and for years heard about the Little Norwegians. And he said, pictured some real tiny people. Yeah. And he said they would talk about the Little Norwegians, the Little Norwegians. And he said, finally he met an ELS pastor, and he says, much to my surprise, he said he was normally sized. He had pictured people, 5 foot or under, I guess, in that way. But the Little Synod had to do with the size of it. And as an interesting trivia, that synod would become home for the Prices at some point, a significant number of that family. Anyway, Robert and Jacob would leave the ELC and with a great deal of turmoil and go into the ELS and then go from the ELS to Missouri Synod. And eventually Jacob Price, of course, would become the president of Missouri Synod, and that's another story. But it's very unusual, I think, for someone who has come through 2 different church bodies to get to a third and end up becoming the president of that church body. That's very unusual. And someone of Norwegian ancestry to become the president of the Missouri Synod is unusual too. However, he did make quite a point of the fact that way back the family did have German roots. So that was good. Which reminds me, yes, of something else too, but that doesn't even have to be told. Okay. Yeah. In 1930, and during the 1930s, I would say a major change took place in the Lutheran Free Church. Oh yeah, I wanted to say this other story too. Yeah. In 17, when the merger took place, the Lutheran Free Church was invited to participate. And they scornfully rejected that invitation. And actually an editorial, I believe it was in Folkebladet, the writer said, used some scriptural analogy to it, and he said the 3 church bodies that marched in to form this new church body, there were the Pharisees, I think that was the Hauge Synod, and then there were the Sadducees, who were the Norwegian Synod, and then there were the scribes or whatever. I don't know. They described it all with these different groups, all negative, marching in together. And in the next issue of the paper of the new church body, they just had one simple comment, and the dogs remained outside. Yeah. So these people, kind of swung. Yeah, yeah, strong feelings. In 1930, T.O. Berntvedt was elected as the president of the Lutheran Free Church. These are 2 of the early leaders. Ginild was the first full-time president. Actually, the first president of the Lutheran Free Church was Elias P. Harbo, the man on the right. And one of his sons, by the way, would end up as a teacher here at Bible school some years ago. Anchor Harbo, who was a retired FBI agent. Interesting individual. And he has left us the bulk of his father's library and his class notes. which we haven't even begun to go through yet to see the treasures that are there. This is Old Main at Augsburg. The building still stands today. And George Sverdrup, who would become the second leader of the school. This is in 1947 where the Lutheran Free Churches were located, the districts. And you can see how very much clustered they were in the upper Midwest, a few in Canada, and then a few up in the Pacific Northwest. Basically, that was it. There was one in New York, in the Bronx. And that, in terms of district, was a part of the Rockford, Illinois district, because they didn't know what to do with it otherwise.
Still there?
No, it isn't there any longer, no. Membership in 1897, this is, very approximate. 1963, when it ceased to exist, there were 328 congregations, 92,000, almost 93,000 baptized membership. The Union movement. Berntved, who was elected as president in 1930, I wonder if I don't have a picture of him here. No, I don't. Yes, well, that's him. Yeah, that's old Papa Berntved on the right there. Yeah. Had not come through either the struggles or the blessings of the revival. He was a more recent immigrant. And he came an extremely gifted man and a very strong leader, a beloved leader, who served from 1930 to 1958 as president of the church body. Early in his time at Augsburg, he said, as president, he said, the Lutheran Free Church has departed from its original ideals. We have become a church body, not a mere movement. He did say, to be sure, we are differently organized. And he began to sound the note for a more effective organization and eventually for the need to unite with other Lutherans. The second individual who would become very prominent in this union movement was Dr. Bernard M. Christensen. B.M. Christensen. Dr. Christensen in 1938 became the president of Augsburg College and served there till 1962. Dr. Christensen had studied in the East, sometime in Europe as well. While he received his doctorate, I believe, from the Hartford Seminary Foundation. While he was doing his graduate studies, Dr. Christensen grew up in a Lutheran Free Church, by the way, up in northeastern Wisconsin. His brother was a member of my home church, and they came from around Peshtigo, Wisconsin, if anybody knows where that is, near Marinette. He came to Augsburg as a young student, came through, and his abilities were recognized, and he was funded for some graduate studies. While he was in New York, he served for a time on the staff of an ELC church in Brooklyn. And another one who was on that staff temporarily was the son of Sven Oftedal, Osmund Oftedal. Dr. Berntved, during those years of study, moved to a different view of Scripture than what he had previously held, where he looked upon Scripture as more of a human book and did not accept the inerrancy of Scripture. Oftedal was aware of this. And so when Christensen's name was suggested as president of Augsburg, Oftedal fought it. He said, this man is not standing on the scripture where our forefathers stood. And there was a statement that Christensen made that sounded okay. But you know what I'm going to say in all of these different church bodies, what happens? And whether we're talking about ELC or we're talking about Missouri Synod or whatever it is, if you are one of our boys, if you've grown up in the church, and we know you and we know your family and whatever, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous. Yes, it's dangerous. And they, I knew Dr. Christensen. Lovely man. A warm-hearted Christian. A man with a real evangelical concern. A man who was a welcome speaker in his younger years at Bible camps and youth gatherings. Someone with a devotional emphasis that was really quite remarkable. Coming to Augsburg as a student during his last year, this elderly man would want to know who you were and where you were from, and would remember you, and very concerned about individuals. But Dr. Christensen, during his years at Augsburg, from 38 to 62, opened the doors to one professor after another professor who held to a lower view of Scripture. And the higher critical approach to Scripture, the denial of the inerrancy of Scripture, became the norm rather than the exception. Dr. Bernfeld also, I don't know where he stood on those issues. I would suspect he was more conservative than Dr. Christensen, but I don't know that. He was also someone very much loved. They said with Dr. Bernfeld, he would go out on the train and get off it in various towns and just show up at churches and at parsonages and minister to the people. And he was just respected and loved in his ministry all throughout the church body. Strong leadership. Strong leadership. I think of one story. I was reflecting about it, talking to my wife here when we passed through this area of South Dakota. It's in Derek's area. And a pastor was called to serve a parish that was there at that time. And Dr. Bernfeld said, well, just tell him right off the bat, you're not going to live in the parsonage. That's the only way you're going to get them to build a new parsonage. Refuse to do it. Okay. So the man accepted the call and came in and said, I'm not going to live in that parsonage. And he got an apartment in Sisseton. Well, instead of building a new parsonage, the congregation fired him. Yeah. And he had a very short time there. His wife tells the story very vividly afterward. This was his first call right out of the seminary. But that was Dr. Bernfeld. You just tell him what to do. You know, you force him to do it like that. And there's one account too of his visiting one pastor who didn't do so well in the ministry. Well, how's it going with you? How is it going with you, brother? Oh, the pastor said, the Lord is good. I know the Lord is good. That's not what I asked. What's going on with you here in this parish? You know, how's it going for you? And a very, very, very direct, very pointed. He was asked to give away daughters of pastors at weddings when the father had died. He was the substitute dad for some of these families, because when the pastor died, it was Dr. Bernfeld who was there, who walked the family through some of these troubled times, and they honored him, and he would be sure to help them later on, some of these, that they'd get to Augsburg, that they'd get to college, you know, and took this kind of a personal interest in the families of the pastors as well. It's interesting to think what might have happened if he lived. In 1944, there was an invitation from the ELC, a union committee, and some years later, 2 invitations to the Lutheran Free Church. In 1949, one of those invitations was accepted. Well, we'll talk about it. It's getting time to quit, isn't it? It's when people walk out, yes. But they said, we're not in favor of organic union. How was it then that the Lutheran Free Church ceased its existence and began to become a part, eventually, of a new Lutheran church body? How could such a thing happen, that they would depart from their ideals? We will discover the answer to that when we meet next time. By the way, the other man in the picture, the man on the left, is Dr. John Stensvag, who was the next president of the Lutheran Free Church and the final president of that church body.